Good afternoon, my name is Andrew Kenny, and this is number 9 in my short series of videos entitled 10 of the Best. And by 10 of the best, I mean 10 of the best Christian books I've read and recommend since I became a Christian over 40 years ago. Now, today's book is different again from the other ones in that it has to do with history. Actually the history of Christianity. And the book is called History of Christianity, and it's been published by Lion. Now, this is the 1990 edition. You might think it's a bit old, but as we shall see, it's a history book. So we've just lost what happened in the last 30 years, and we could easily find that out, and we've probably lived through most of it. But certainly it gives you the history of the church from AD 1 until 1990. But it's important to know history, and it's important for a Christian to know the history of the church. Now, many Christians think that the church sort of ended with the Acts of the Apostles, died off, came back with the Reformation and Martin Luther, disappeared again, and then came back with Billy Graham. When it's of course not true. The church has always been there. God has never left himself without a witness. Now, there's characters we should know. We should know about the early Christian martyrs, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Origen, people like that. The early Celtic Christians, Columba, Patrick, Aidan, wonderful characters, wonderful saints. We should know about Thomas à Kempis, Thomas Aquinas, the mystics, the Wesleyan or Methodist revival in the 18th century. These are very important for a Christian to find out our roots. There's nothing new under the sun, and we have seen things such as Gnosticism in the early church. We see similar Gnostic doctrines coming back in the likes of the Mormons, etc. So let's have a look at the contents of this book. So we'll just go to that now. Looking at the book, The History of Christianity, it has 8 sections. The first section is an overview of the history of the church and looks at several historians, including Josephus, Bede, Eusebius, John Foxe, who was famous for his book, Foxe's Book of Martyrs, and Kenneth Latourette, who wrote several volumes on the history of the church. Section 2 gets into church history proper, and we look at Peter and Paul. We look at the challenge to the faith, those who came after Peter and Paul, such as Ignatius of Antioch. We look at the persecution under Nero, a group called the Montanists, who were really like a Pentecostal church. We look at Perpetua, who was a female martyr and a great hero to the early church. We look at Cyprian and North Africa, Justin Martyr. Then we look at the Gnostics, and they had a strange knowledge, or a secret knowledge, and we see some of that sort of teaching about nowadays in some of the cults. We look at the Irenaeus, who was a famous Christian. We look at Marcion, who was classed as a heretic. We look at Origen, who perhaps wrote the first systematic theology. Tertullian, etc. We look at how the first Christians worshipped, etc. So that's from 81 to 325. In section 3, we look at the period of 325 to 600, acceptance and conquest. So here we look at Constantine and the Christian Empire. Constantine became the first Christian emperor. So we consider characters such as Athanasius, Ambrose, Basil the Great, and we'll consider councils and creeds, Nicene Creed, etc. Cyril of Alexandria, Jerome, Columba, the Church in North Africa with Augustine of Hippo, then Christian ascetics and monks, including Patrick, Benedict, etc. Section 4, a later period, a Christian society. So we look at the West in crisis, Gregory the Great. We look at the Eastern Church, the flowering of the Western Church. And again, we meet some wonderful characters such as Bernard of Clairvaux, who wrote a few famous hymns, Francis of Assisi. The Crusades, which were really a black mark against the church, though some would probably argue against me on that one. Peter Abelard, Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian who wrote magnificent systematic theology. Consider the Orthodox Church, persecution and Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, etc. Groups such as the Cathars and the Waldensians. The Waldensians seemed to be quite an evangelical group, but they were pre-Reformation, before Martin Luther was even born. And then consider guys such as Jan Hus, who was a priest 100 years before Martin Luther. Luther at one stage thought Hus was a heretic, and he called himself a German Hussite. Savonarola, and he was a tremendous minister and preacher, considered himself a prophet. John Wycliffe, William of Ockham, all these guys were before the English Reformation but also before the German Reformation. So between 1500 and 1650, we look at reform, the seeds of renewal. So we look at Luther, we look at Martin Bucer, Zwingli, Calvin, Beza, Cranmer, and John Bunyan, the famous Puritan who wrote The Pilgrim's Progress. William Tyndale and his Bibles. And then there was a Catholic Reformation or a Counter-Reformation after that, and we read of characters such as Ignatius of Loyola, the Jesuits, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross. Section 16 deals with reason, revival, and revolution. Characters such as Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, who was a friend of John Wesley, Spencer Howell Harris. We look at the Methodists, John and Charles Wesley, and particularly looking at their hymns and church music. In expansion worldwide, the first English missions. Look at Count von Zinzendorf, who was the Moravian leader, who had a big influence on mission work, and also the early Methodists, including Wesley. Reason and unreason. We can look at Blaise Pascal, George Fox and the Quakers and Unitarians. Section 7 deals with cities and empires. It's from the period 789 to 1914. And we look at the industrial nation, the first industrial nation. We consider groups such as the Salvation Army, the Oxford Movement, the Brethren, characters such as Thomas Chalmers, C.H. Spurgeon, Cardinal Newman. Then the coming of D.L. Moody, C.H. Spurgeon, Outposts of Empire. We look at William Wilberforce, who did much to stop slavery in the UK. Look at David Wilkinson, the great explorer, missionary. William Carey, Hudson Taylor, who founded the China Inland Mission. The last section, 8, deals with present and future. Looks at the age of ideology, the Christian Church and the Jews, Martin Luther King. Age of anxiety, Albert Schweitzer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, C.S. Lewis. And an age of liberation. Look at the famous Japanese Christian, Toyohiko Kagawa. Look at Billy Graham, Helder Camara, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Pope John the 23rd, who was involved in the Vatican II, Pentecostalism and the Charismatic movement, basically taking us up to 1990. We'll just look now, before we finish, at a few passages taken from the book. The first one is by Bede, the early English historian, and the second one is from a letter written in probably the early 2nd century about the group called Christians. And finally, a piece from Thomas à Kempis from The Imitation of Christ. This section is taken from Bede's History of the English Church. On Aidan's arrival, the king, that is Oswald of Northumbria, appointed the island of Lindisfarne to be his see at his own request. As the tide ebbs and flows, this place is surrounded by sea twice a day like an island, and twice a day the sand dries and joins it to the mainland. The king always listened humbly and readily to Aidan's advice, and diligently set himself to establish and extend the Church of Christ throughout his kingdom. And while the bishop, who was not fluent in the English language, preached the gospel, it was most delightful to see the king himself interpreting the word of God to his elder men and thanes. He never sought or cared for any worldly possessions, and loved to give away to the poor, who chanced to meet him whatever he received from kings or wealthy folk. Whether in town or country, he always travelled on foot, unless compelled by necessity to ride, and whatever people he met on his walks, whether high or low, he stopped and spoke to them. If they were heathen, he urged them to be baptized, and if they were Christians, he strengthened their faith and inspired them by word and deed to live a good life and to be generous to others. His life is in marked contrast to the apathy of our own times. Now, that was written by Bede many, many years ago. Now, this letter is entitled Those Christians, and it was possibly written in the 2nd century. For Christians are not differentiated from other people by country, language, or customs. You see, they do not live in cities of their own, or speak some strange dialect, or have some peculiar lifestyle. This teaching of theirs has not been contrived by the invention and speculation of inquisitive men, nor are they propagating mere human teaching as some people do. They live in both Greek and foreign cities, wherever chance has put them. They follow local customs in clothing, food, and other aspects of life, but at the same time they demonstrate to us the wonderful and certainly unusual form of their own citizenship. They live in their own native lands, but as aliens. As citizens they share all things with others, but like aliens, suffer all things. Every foreign country is to them as their native country, and every native land as a foreign country. They marry and have children, just like everyone else, but they do not kill unwanted babies. They offer a shared table, but not a shared bed. They are at present in the flesh, but they do not live according to the flesh. They are passing their days on earth, but are citizens of heaven. They obey the appointed laws and go beyond the laws in their own lives. They love everyone, but are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and gain life. They are poor and yet make many rich. They are short of everything and yet have plenty of all things. They are dishonored and yet gain glory through dishonor. Their names are blackened and yet they are cleared. They are mocked and bless in return. They are treated outrageously and behave respectfully to others. When they do good, they are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if being given new life. They are attacked by Jews as aliens and are persecuted by Greeks. Yet those who hate them cannot give any reason for their hostility. To put it simply, the soul is to the body as Christians are to the world. The soul is spread through all parts of the body and Christians through all the cities of the world. The soul is in the body, but is not of the body. Christians are in the world, but not of the world. So the third passage I'm going to read is from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. So this little section is entitled On Friendship with Jesus. He says, "What can the world offer you without Jesus? To be without Jesus is hell, most grievous. To be with Jesus is to know the sweetness of heaven. If Jesus is with you, no enemy can harm you. Whoever finds Jesus finds a rich treasure and a good above every good. He who loses Jesus loses much indeed, and more than the whole world. Poorest of all men is he who lives without Jesus, and richest of all is he who stands in favour with Jesus." Now that's an absolutely remarkable book. So this book covers every sort of aspect of the Christian church, or the history of Christianity. Now it doesn't include everything, but as you read the chapters, as you read about the characters, it will inspire you to find out more about them, and you will buy individual books on, say, Augustine or Wesley or the Salvation Army or Thomas à Kempis. They say it's a one-stop book, but it's more like a tourist book, which tells you all about all these places in the world you have to visit and inspires you to visit them. But in this case, it inspires you to read about different periods of the church, be it early church or the Reformation or the Evangelical Revival or the pre-Reformation mystics. It's inspiring. So I hope you do get a copy, and I can thoroughly say that you will enjoy it and you will be blessed by reading it. So thanks for listening. That was number 9 in my series entitled 10 of the Best. God be with you. Bye-bye.